Welcome to The Explainer. Today we've got a wild story for you, how a private company, a business, ended up conquering an entire subcontinent. We're talking, of course, about the British East India Company.
So how does a corporation conquer a country? I mean, that sounds like something out of a futuristic movie, right? But this is exactly what happened in India starting more than 2 centuries ago. And it didn't begin with an army or a king. It began with a bunch of merchants who were just looking to get rich.
All right, so to really get how this all went down, we got to rewind the clock. Back in the 17th century, the East India Company wasn't some kind of empire. It was just a business, plain and simple, and it had one very clear goal. Okay, so the company's business plan? It was brutally simple, really. It was all about this one idea, mercantile trade. The whole strategy was to get their hands on Indian goods, think amazing cottons and spices, buy them cheap, and then sell them for a massive profit back in Europe. The key, the whole game, was to lock everyone else out.
But of course, there was a catch. They were not the only ones with this idea. India was the ultimate prize, and by the time the English showed up, the Portuguese were already there, the Dutch were sniffing around, and the French were not far behind. It was a full-blown race.
And this, as you can imagine, is where things start to get really messy. Everybody wanted the exact same stuff, and when that happens, what happens to prices? They shoot up. This competition was killing the profits for every single one of these companies. So the only way forward, in their eyes, was to just get rid of the rivals. This meant trade wasn't going to be peaceful anymore. No way. They had to arm up, and suddenly, these merchants are also soldiers.
Now this fight for profit, it wasn't just contained to the Europeans bickering amongst themselves. Oh no, it was bound to spill over and create conflict with the actual rulers of India, who, understandably wanted to control what was happening in their own territory.
And that's exactly what happened in Bengal, which was one of the wealthiest provinces in India. You had the local ruler, the Nawab on one side, and the company on the other, with completely opposite goals. I mean, look at this. The Nawab wants them to pay taxes. The company wants to pay zero taxes. He wants them to stop building forts. They want to build bigger forts. It was a classic showdown waiting to happen. So, in 1757, the inevitable happened, the collision. It was called the Battle of Plassey. And this was the moment that changed absolutely everything. The company, led by this guy, Robert Clive, beat the Nawab's army. And, a huge part of their win wasn't just about guns and tactics. It was about betrayal, right from inside the Nawab's own camp. This was it, the company's first real taste of territorial power in India. And right after that battle, you can just see the ambition shift. It's incredible. Just 2 years later, the company's leader, Robert Clive, isn't just talking about trade anymore. Suddenly, he's writing about controlling rich kingdoms and pulling in an income of 2 million sterling a year. That's not a company's profit margin. That's the revenue of a small country.
So, once they got a taste of military power and the control that came with it, the whole game plan started to change. This was the big pivot. It wasn't just about being able to trade anymore. It was about controlling the people who made the rules of trade.
Their first move was clever, or so they thought. They tried to install puppet rulers. Like the guy who betrayed his own Nawab at Plassey. But here's the thing. Even puppets have some pride, right? They have a responsibility to their people. So when these puppet rulers started pushing back, the company realized that indirect control just wasn't cutting it. As Clive himself put it, he basically said, "Forget this. We have to become the Nawabs ourselves."
And then, in 1765, they got their massive break. The Mughal emperor granted the company the Diwani of Bengal. Now this is so important. This wasn't just another trade deal. This gave them the right to collect tax revenue from millions of people. Think about that. A for-profit company is now the official tax collector for a massive province.
And let me tell you, the Diwani was the ultimate game changer. It solved their biggest problem. See, before, the company had this issue. They had to keep shipping gold and silver from Britain to buy Indian goods. But now they could use the tax money they collected from Indians to buy Indian goods, to pay their soldiers, and to run their whole operation. It's brilliant and brutal. India's own money was now being used to fund its own takeover.
With all this cash flowing in, the company's expansion just kicks into overdrive. And they develop some pretty slick and ruthless tools to make it happen, to systematically swallow up Indian states. One of the big ones was something called the Subsidiary Alliance. Now on paper, it sounds like a protection deal, right? We'll protect you. But really, it was a trap.
Indian rulers were forced to get rid of their own armies and then pay the company an insane amount of money for its troops to protect them. And if they couldn't make the payments, well, the company would just slice off a piece of your territory. Simple as that.
So how did they make sure these rulers played along? Well, they installed a British resident, an official right in the king's court. And as one observer at the time, James Milt, put it, this resident was the real king of the country, pulling all the strings from behind the scenes.
If that wasn't enough, they came up with an even more direct tool for grabbing land, the doctrine of lapse. The policy was simple. If an Indian ruler died without a natural male heir, his kingdom was just gone. It would lapse and become British territory, completely tossing aside the age-old Indian tradition of adopting an heir. It was basically a legal loophole for annexation.
And the results? They were fast and brutal. Look at this list. Kingdom after kingdom was just absorbed. And that last one, Awadh, which they took just by saying it was being misgoverned, was a huge insult. It enraged people and really lit the fuse for the huge rebellion that was about to explode just a year later. Okay, so we've talked about the policies, the battles, the politics, but what does this all actually look like? Let's take a look at the map and see this corporate takeover in action.
Right, let's start in 1797. Even 40 years after that big win at Plassey, you can see the company's control is pretty small. Just a few dots on the coast, really, little footholds.
Okay, now fast forward about 40 years to 1840. Whoa! Thanks to policies like that subsidiary alliance, their territory has just exploded. It is a massive change. They're no longer just on the coast, they're deep in the heart of India.
And now, the final jump to 1857. After that last wave of annexations using the doctrine of lapse, it's basically all over. The transformation is complete. What started as a few trading posts has now swallowed almost the entire subcontinent.
Those maps are powerful, but the numbers are just staggering. By 1857, we're talking about a private company with shareholders back in London directly ruling 63% of the land and 78% of the people. It's a corporate takeover on a national scale. It's just mind-boggling.
So there you have it, from a simple trading company just looking to make a profit to a colonial superpower running an empire. The story of the East India Company is a pretty powerful lesson, isn't it? It shows how that drive for profit, step by step, can morph into a hunger for power and territory. It's a story from the past that leaves us with a very, very modern question, one we should probably think about today. What happens when a corporation's power grows to rival a nation's?